With the MLB draft come and gone and little movement at the trade deadline from the Seattle Mariners prospects, Joe and I decided to do our top 30 prospects re-rank. And we're going to be getting that in this video from number 30 all the way to number 1. Can you guys guess who number 1 is going to be in our system? Probably.
I hope so.
They probably can.
It should be unanimous.
Yeah, with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching episode 110 of the Hit It Here podcast, part of the Bleav network, the Jimmy Joyce episode of the Hit It Here podcast. And I am here with Jimmy Joyce truther himself, Joe.
Yeah, I had Jimmy Joyce in my top 30. You'll notice at some point here that Jimmy Joyce is not here. We did something a little bit different. We couldn't come to an agreement with our final 30th prospect here. And it was between Jimmy Joyce and I won't reveal yours yet because that's who the end of the episode will be. But this was... I'm liking how this kind of turned out. We kind of came to an agreement where obviously we just averaged out our lists and it came together nicely. But again, that 30th pick, we just had no idea what to go with. And we sent a message over to our resident prospect ball knower, Accent, about a list of 5 or 6 names. Ricardo Cova was among them. Reed Van Scooter's name was in there. But Accent decided on number 30 being drafted this year, a catcher starting pitcher, Grant Knipp. Grant Knipp, welcome to the Mariners top 30. If you guys would have thought that a two-way player would have made it to the Mariners top 30 prospect system, that's probably a pretty steep bet. I don't know what the odds were on that one, but you would have found out with BetOnline.
BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your #1 source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you could receive a 50% free bet of up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything, including the Olympics. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games or Olympic events are being played. When the game's over, though, you can head on over to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or even unwind with one of the over 150 slots games available. Head to the website today to get in on the action, and when you're there, use promo code Bleav, that's BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. BetOnline, the game starts here.
That brings us to number 29 here, where Joe and I were both able to come to a consensus that Alberto Rodriguez should be our 30th pick, but because we couldn't agree on who should be 29, we moved Alberto Rodriguez to 29, brought Grant Knipp into the top 30 here. Then we have at 28, outfielder Carlos Jimenez. I had him at 25, Joe had him in 29th. Going to number 27 now, AJ Izzy, starting pitcher. I had him at 28. Joe had him at 25. Number 26, we have third baseman Brock Rodden, who I had at 23. Joe had at 27. And rounding out the first... Nope.
You're stopping there, actually.
I am stopping right there, yeah.
You want to tell me why you had Brock Rodden at 23?
Brock Rodden's having a pretty solid year so far this year, and as a third base prospect. I don't know. I'm pretty high on Brock Rodden. I know a lot of people are as well. So in 27 games at AA, Brock Rodden is hitting 200, but... in 67 games down in Everett, he was hitting over 300. Brock Rodden is a guy who can play all around the infield for you. And just compared to the rest of the guys on this list that we had a little bit lower than him, I wasn't that high on him. Grant Knipp's a guy that I think, makes a lot of sense, but I don't really think he's part of the top 30 necessarily in my opinion.
It's kind of just a fun, it's a content pick.
Yeah, we let Accent pick one for us. Alberto Rodriguez is a guy that has been on this list for quite some time now. He was very much in danger of falling off of it. So I just think Brock Rodden as an infielder just made a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, a guy that fell off was Taylor Dollard off of this list. Neither of us even considered it. So just keep that in mind as we work through here. Going into 25 now. Got Tyler Guff. Colton had him at 27. I had him a bit higher at 21. We then had, I think, our first and only maybe full agreement on a position. Luis Suisbel at
Alberto
24.
Rodriguez, we both had at 30.
Yeah, but that's that's not really there, right? It's Luis Suisbel at 24 here, first base, third base prospect. 23rd, pretty big disparity here. Josh Caron, drafted this year, a catcher. It was the 4th round pick, right? Mm-hmm. Colton had him at 19. I had him at 28. So let us know if I'm low on him at 28 or if Colton's a little bit high on him at 19. It's a nice addition to the prospect system here with adding some catching depth through the draft. Cole Phillips here at 22 as a starting pitcher. Obviously, he's not pitching right now because of his Tommy John surgery that he got in the winter, but Colton had him at 20. I had him at 26. I'm a little bit lower just with the injury stuff. And then at 21, we've got Walter Ford here. Obviously, starting pitcher, just made his first start in Arkansas. Whoa. Just made his first start in Modesto recently. Colton had him at 26. I had him at 19. Another big gap there. Am I stopping at 21? Is that how that works? Okay. So, Colton, I had Walter Ford. I don't know. I had him in the top 20, similar to how you had Josh Caron in the top 20. I think we both make a case right now for the guys that we had the biggest gaps on that ended up out of the top 20, but in 25 range, which is, I think, pretty solid for both of them. Walter Ford, I mentioned he just made his first start in Modesto. Finally making it out of the complex league is Walter Ford. He's super young, the vanilla missile. I've got good faith for whatever reason. And maybe it's blind faith, misguided judgment, that I think Walter Ford is a guy that can continue to progress. He wasn't like extremely sharp in that first outing in Modesto, but it's the first one. He's definitely got a lot of room to grow. I think pitchers that you draft out of high school that are that young, like, there's definitely a lot of life in the arm, and that was the big question mark last year when he dropped heavily in the Mariners prospect rankings. He lost a lot of the velo. I think it's starting to really kind of grow back in there, but in the complex league in 2024, he pitched to a 3.27 ERA in 12 games pitched total. So it's not great. It's not perfect. I still think there's a lot of raw talent in Walter Ford's arm. The vanilla missile, welcome to Modesto. Hopefully, you keep tearing it up.
Yeah, Josh Caron, obviously, like we said, was drafted earlier this year in the 4th round in 60 games in the NCAA in Nebraska. I don't even know where was he? Nebraska State?
No, just Nebraska.
All right.
He's just, we're accent, the Cornhuskers. All Nebraska.
Right. Yeah, he's from Nebraska. Anyway, in 60 games, Josh Caron was hitting 308, 388, 579. He had 16 home runs in those 60 games. He walked 25 times, struck out 51 times. He had an OPS of 968. So Josh Caron's the guy that I think in a system that was lacking so much catching depth, I think for him specifically, a power hitting catcher, a guy who is a bit on the older side for getting drafted at this point. He's about to be 21 years old. So you could see him here in a couple of years, probably a little bit more advanced as a college catcher. And I think that because of that, I have him ranked a little bit higher than Joe did. But moving on now, at number 20, another guy that was drafted this year, we had Hunter Cranton, which I think is a very interesting one. He was a senior sign, right?
I believe so, out of Kansas.
Yeah. At 19, we had another reliever in Troy Taylor. So back-to-back relievers here. I had Troy Taylor at 22. Joe had him at 20. Also for Hunter Cranton, I had at 21. Joe had at 22. Continuing on with the pitchers here, at 18, we had Teddy McGraw, starting pitcher. I had at 18. Joe had at 17. We were pretty close. Once we got out of like the 20 to 30 range,
we dialed in.
We dialed in a little bit. At 17, we had DeWalt Joseph. He's a shortstop out of the international signing period. The Mariners got him last year, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. And I had him at 17. Joe had him at 16. Continuing with the international signing period, we go on to Jeter Martinez here, a starting pitcher at 16, who I had at 16 and Joe had at 15. I think the most interesting one there is Hunter Cranton, because I think that, honestly, he could probably be pitching out of the big leagues next year. Yeah. I think that he's already prepared to be in the back end of a bullpen. I'm not necessarily saying that he's going to be like Andres Munoz. But in terms of, like, he, in my opinion, could take the Garrett Crochet route to the big leagues and you could bring him up right now if you want to. I don't care. Do it. Give it a shot. Joe, do you have anyone interesting that you like in this little section here?
Well, I think going, kind of like piggybacking off your idea about Cranton making it to the bigs sooner rather than later, Troy Taylor is a guy that should be on a lot of people's radar, given Gregory Santos getting an MRI on his bicep. If the Mariners want to, say, go the route of bringing Troy Taylor up from Arkansas, who's pitched to like a 1.65 ERA down in Arkansas, like he's pitching very, very well, lower than 1.65, 1.35 for him down there in 25 games. Troy Taylor, he's definitely an option for the Mariners to add to the bullpen if they don't want to, say, move Logan Evans back out of the starting pitching role, back into a reliever role. You've got Troy Taylor, who's been a reliever down in Arkansas. If they, say, don't fancy any of the guys down in Tacoma nearly as much, it's an option for you. It was a guy that I thought maybe could have been moved at the deadline, just a team that maybe wants a like club-controlled arm that is relatively close to being MLB ready. Troy Taylor, I think, is that. Like, I found it really interesting that we dialed in through this range of like prospect. We were basically like one or two off here. And I think that I think that tells me that where this farm system is at, this is a lot of like potentially rich talent in the 20 through 15 range, right? Like, we're looking at Jeter Martinez, a guy that was in the international draft signing, or like the draft pool, signing pool in the Felon and Celestine class, who entered the Mariners top 30 at the end of last year, had a great Dominican Summer League, is now halfway up the list. He's almost cracking into the top 15, not quite there for us. Bleav Joseph, another guy that's international, like an international guy who very well could be a super hyper athlete that works his way up here. A guy that hasn't cracked the top 30 yet, or I don't really think he's sniffed the top 30. Leandro Romero, the other guy that the Mariners signed out of the top 50 in the international pool last year, along with Bleav Joseph. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Romero's creeping into the top 30s and like maybe like the late 20s by this time next year. But moving forward, I don't think there's really anybody else. Maybe Teddy McGraw. He's probably working back. I think he's working back soon, right?
Yeah, he hasn't pitched yet. Yeah,
but I think it's soon. A guy that has been pitching. Transitions are crazy. We're working 15 through 11 here. Michael Morales was the current top-ranked starting or just pitching prospect for the Mariners. Got him at 15. Colton had him at 15. I had him at 14. Brandon Garcia, Arkansas Traveler, lefty, another pitcher, doing great there. I believe, or he's doing great in Everett, got moved to Arkansas recently, but I think in his first start he went 5 innings with no runs to his name. Colton had him at 14, I had him at 18. Up next, we've got Logan Evans, 13th. Colton had him at 13, I had him at 12. So a lot of pitching in the 10 through 20 range here. The Mariners farm system that seemed almost depleted of pitching has now either had guys develop and then grow into legitimate prospects. They've also drafted well in that regard last year and in this year. We got Ben Williamson at 12 here. He is going to break up the pitching trough that I was just describing. Colton had him at 11. I had him at 13. Drafted last year in the second round. I think, the 56th pick? Doesn't really matter. Hit well. Continuing to hit well in Arkansas. Playing phenomenal defense down there. 11 here, Colton. The draftee. Which one is it?
It's going to be Ryan Sloan, the high school pitcher. Here, I had him at 10. Joe had him at 11. I had Ryan Sloan ranked higher than Jurrangelo Cijntje because I think that you can dream a little bit more on Ryan Sloan's arm than you can Cijntje's. I think Cijntje fits in as like a good, like maybe middle of the rotation guy. I think Ryan Sloan has a chance to be an ace, but he's a little bit further away. A lot more development time needed for him. A guy that I wanted to talk about here that you mentioned a little bit was Ben Williamson. Between both leagues so far this year, in 86 games between single A, or high A and double A, he's hitting 279, 371, 383. He's only hit 3 home runs, but overall, he's a guy that I think is probably like, you could maybe see him next year towards like the second half of the year if you need to. He can play kind of all over the infield, kind of found a home at third base, I think. He's a guy that I honestly thought might get moved at the deadline as teams wanted guys a little bit closer to the big leagues. Obviously, it didn't happen. So I think that Ben Williamson's a guy that maybe the Mariners could be waiting on to see if he could impact the team next year in the middle of the year. But he's a guy that I like quite a bit, Joe.
I think maybe the power being gone, is that related to like Arkansas being a hard right-handed pitcher or right-handed batter's ballpark? Maybe. I feel like he's got more doubles power than home run power, so it's not the prototypical power bat at a corner, but I feel like he's more of like a glove first third baseman going forward anyways. He's definitely a guy that every single time I go on Twitter and the Travelers are playing, Mariners Minors has posted a clip of Ben Williamson making some miraculous play over at third base. Like, it's almost without fail every night Ben Williamson is getting posted on Twitter. Just a great defensive play. So it's someone that is getting a decent amount of exposure from that account, which is great. And I think maybe that is part of the reason why he is starting to catch on a little bit here. Sloan, I'm sorry he didn't make the top 10 for you. He, as far as high school pitching goes, he seems like he's super developed. Like, he's big. He's 6'4". He's got like 10 or 20 pounds on like a lot of the guys already in this rotation. Like, he is a developed athletic body that once he just kind of gets through the motions and starts ramping up maybe like the innings and just like bullpens and everything like that. Yes, he's a high school pitcher, but this seems like a guy that could work through the systems pretty quickly. So I understand maybe dreaming on him a bit more, like you're saying, he could be like ranked higher at the end of the day, like maybe having a higher ceiling than Jurrangelo Cijntje, but that didn't stop me, Colton, from putting Cijntje, forcing him basically into the top 10 here, cracking the top 10 at 10. Colton, you had him at 12. I had him at 8.
I did have him at 12. In fact, in front of him, I had both Ben Williamson and Ryan Sloan. I think that Senja is a guy that there's just so many options with him. He's a guy that, like I said, could probably move quickly into like a middle of the rotation arm for you. He is, of course, a switch pitcher, much more dominant with his right hand, but can occasionally get in there against a lefty or something like that in certain spots in a game. And the Mariners said they're going to let him run with it, and I don't see why they wouldn't. And because of that, I think that Senja is a guy that makes a lot of sense for the future of this rotation. But again, just because of where I think he slots into a rotation, a prospective rotation in the future, that's why I had Sloan higher than him. I do like Durangelo Senja a lot. Obviously, the Mariners did too, taking him over guys like Trey Savage and whatnot, who still at the time of recording this has not signed with the Blue Jays. I think he has to sign by Monday, so we'll see what happens there. But yeah, Joe, what do you have to say about Durangelo Senja?
It's a very exciting prospect. There's never really been a draft prospect, at least on the pitching side, quite like Durangelo Senja. You mentioned like he's a bit more prolific from the right side. It does provide you that weird flexibility from the left. Yes, they're going to continue to allow him to switch pitch. Does he fill out his entire career by doing that? I don't think so. But at the end of the day, I don't think that matters. Like, he can touch high 90s with his right arm, and like he's got it seems like a very good feel for the like just being on the mound. And if there's also a team, at least a farm system that can cultivate him the best way, it's the Mariners. This is almost like the perfect draft pick for the Mariners to get. Is like, yes, it's a weird kind of pick. Like Senja maybe didn't make. I mean, he was ranked 25th. Ryan Sloan was a ranked higher prospect as far as the draft boards were concerned. Is there a team that can get the most out of Durangelo Senja? Yes, and I feel like it's the Mariners. That's why I had him at 8. We move on here to 9th in the system. A guy having a great year, Michael Arroyo, infielder. You have him listed as a shortstop, but like he can play all over the infield. You had him at 7. I had him at 10. I think he just kind of fell down my rankings a little bit because some guys moved up and like obviously drafting like a Durangelo Senja year. But Michael Arroyo, he's currently in Everett. Was in Modesto for a long time, helped lead Modesto to the California Championship last year. Obviously, he burst onto the scene in the Complex League last year. I think he hit like 600 over like a couple games, and then immediately like, all right, go to Modesto, have fun, buddy. And he is like, to me, feels like a really big glue guy down there in Modesto last year, and then now he's in Everett now. Colton?
Yeah, he'll be 21 years old in November. He's a guy who really shot up through the ranks, in my opinion, over the past year or so. He's only played in 26 games in Everett, hitting 242, 387, 434 with 4 homers. He hasn't put it all together yet at Everett, but down in Modesto, he was hitting 279, 404, 500 this year with 11 home runs in 60 games. I think that Michael Arroyo is a guy who, again, when we were talking about trades and whatnot, a guy that I thought the Mariners might try to trade high on. A guy who, again, has put it all together, it seems like, over the past calendar year or so, and the Mariners might want to trade him because of that. With that being said, you are so stocked. Oh, God. Just, like, threw up my mouth. Mm-hmm. With that being said, you are so stocked over the next, like, 10 or so guys to where the infield is not necessarily a problem for you, which is another reason why I thought maybe he could get traded here. But I think the Mariners, a 21-year-old guy down there in Everett who has a real chance to make his way up to Arkansas probably at the beginning of next year, in my opinion. I think that you can dream on Michael Arroyo a little bit, and I think that he brings a lot of power to the position. 15 homers so far this year in between both levels. A guy who has been hitting for a high average so far. I mean, the sky's the limit for this guy. He's someone who I didn't necessarily have on my radar prior to this year, but he's really burst onto the scene in 2024. Which brings us to our next guy here, Joe, who unfortunately for 2024 doesn't have a whole lot left to do because, well, he had to have surgery on his knee?
Tore his ACL, yeah.
For Johnny Farmello, an outfielder here who was drafted last year. I had him at 9. Joe had him at 7. I dropped him a little bit because of the injury that had happened to him. I mean, we saw, Kyle Lewis, who had his knee, torn up. And maybe it's the memory of that scares me so much of putting him higher here. But, Joe, I had Johnny Farmello at number 9. He comes in at number 8 for us on our list.
Yeah, the average here, 9 plus 7 is 16, divided by 2 is 8. Shockingly enough, that's how math works. Farmello is a guy that he is definitely a very toolsy, hyper-athlete outfielder. It was a non-contact injury. He was just fielding a ball out in center field, like making a play, and then boink, his ACL is just gone, unfortunately. He's a first-round draft pick last year, so there's obviously a lot of hype around him. Immediately cracked into the Mariners' top 10 last year. If he had been able to continue to play this year, like, he felt like a guy that could have maybe started sneaking into people's top fives. Like, he was a guy who definitely could be on a lot of people's lists higher than 8. The injury definitely held me back from putting him higher than 7, but for good reason. Like, it's an injury that could hamper his athletic abilities going forward. I'm not overly worried about it since he was a high school draftee. Like, he's young. This seems like an injury that you can recover from. Hopefully, though, it doesn't impact him, say, like with his speed tool or like his ability to have good range in the outfield going forward. You're saying the Kyle Lewis injuries, it does maybe scare me a little bit here, but Johnny Formello, left-handed bat, did well when he went to Modesto last year. I watched his first ever professional home run, so that was sick. So maybe I've got a little bias there, but his buddy, Ty Pete, comes in at 7 on our list, Colton. Shortstop, infield, playing left field down in Modesto. An overall great vibes guy. Colton, you had him at 6. I had him at 9. Nice. 69. So, for me, the reason why I had Pete at 9, I feel like, yes, there's a lot of raw talent there, and it's evident in what you see, just like similar to Ben Williamson. Ty Pete gets posted a lot on Mariners Minors. That MLB, like, that Twitter account is great. If you are not following it, please do so, because it helps you kind of tap into what these guys are doing on a nightly basis. Ty Pete, a guy that didn't really have a spot in Modesto last year after he got drafted because Colt Emerson was there. Michael Arroyo was there. Like, there were guys kind of ahead of him in the depth chart. He was mainly DHing. Now he's getting moved around all the outfield spots. He's a hyper athlete that is able to do that. Colton, explain to me why you had him at 6.
Yeah, I think Ty Pete, like you said, he's a hyper athlete. He can do whatever you want him to do on a baseball field. The one thing that has scared me away so far is his strikeouts. In 83 games so far, he struck out 118 times. That's a lot of strikeouts down in single A. And so, looking at that, maybe that turns me off of him a little bit. But 5 home runs, 50 RBI. He has 25 stolen bags. He's only been caught twice. He's hitting 268, 343, 396 with a 739 OPS. But last year in the ACL, he hit 351, 429, 432 with an 861. He did not hit a home run when he was down there, which is actually highly unfortunate in rookie ball. But nonetheless, I think that Ty Pete's a guy that, as a hyper athlete, you can basically move him wherever you want to on the field, and I think that he has the potential. I think there's a lot of room for him to grow into his own body specifically. I think that if he puts on a few more pounds of muscle, that he's a guy who the power could come for him. I'm not saying he's going to be like a 30 home run guy, but if he's able to put together some doubles power and maybe hit a ball over the wall once in a while, I think as long as he can cut down on those strikeouts, he's someone that I really look to maybe even make their way a little bit higher on our list in the future. But at the same time, I could also see him falling out of the top 10, just depending on where his bat profile goes from here, depending on how those strikeouts do work out. That brings us to number 6, Joe, a guy we've actually already seen in the big leagues here, in Tyler Locklear at first base. I had him at 8. You had him at 6. We went with him here at 6, and I think that we have seen that this is not the year for Tyler Locklear at first base for the Mariners. But he is a guy who has shown some ability to hit at the major league level. Obviously, the home run off of Garrett Crochet kind of rings true. He didn't really have a whole lot of time, unfortunately, at AAA before he got called up to the big leagues. And so I think that a full year or more development for Tyler Locklear down there at AAA is going to do wonders for him at the plate. Overall, where are you at with Tyler Locklear after seeing him in the bigs this year?
It's definitely just like the situation like you're saying. He's just simply not ready for major league competition. And that's not a fault on him. You mentioned that he rose quickly through the Mariners system. Like, was it last year? He was in Everett last year, right?
Drafted in 2022, yeah.
Yeah, and he was in Everett last year, moved up to Arkansas, helped their playoff push for, I think they made it to the final, like the championship for the Texas League. I think they ended up losing, but he was down there in Arkansas last year. Started out there this year, moved up to Tacoma, and then, like you're saying, got called up to the Mariners. Had a little bit of run, got sent back down, then gets a little bit of run towards the deadline. Didn't really do a whole lot, didn't really play his way into the starting first base spot. I think there's still a lot of value in Tyler Locklear's profile. To every league that he's played in, every level, he has had one of the highest exit velocities, like every single time out. There's no reason for me to believe that he can't develop that as a major league talent as well. He just needs simply more time in Tacoma. And if there's a place where you can really fine-tune your hitting, it's the hitter-friendly PCL. He's probably not going to be an MLB top 100 prospect, even though he is currently right now. As soon as the draftees get added in, like Travis Bazan, like all those guys, any of the top 10, they're probably going to the top 100 more than likely. So Locklear probably falls out, but don't let that shy away from thinking that he's still a great prospect. This is not any way, shape, or form him falling out of the top 100, saying like, oh, he fell off. He's still a very, very good prospect in a very stacked Mariners top 10, coming in at 6. You had him a little bit lower. Is there a reason why you had him at 8?
I think just for what we've seen from him so far, I had a few guys ranked higher than him, including Ty Pete, just because I think that, and Michael Arroyo, because I think that the hyper athleticism of those guys kind of outweighs it for me for Locklear for a first baseman.
Sure.
But I mean, down in Double-A this year, he was hitting 291, 401, 532. He got called up to Tacoma relatively early this season. In 31 games at Tacoma, he was hitting 265, 374, 455. So obviously he can hit. He was able to hit down in the hitter's trench that is Double-A. Mm-hmm. And what's it, Dickey Stevens Stadium? Is that what it's called?
I'm not sure what Arkansas is
Something
called.
like that. And then he comes up to Tacoma and maybe slumped for a little while there, but in the end was still hitting, pretty close to his career norms. He's a career like 280-ish hitter in the minor leagues through every single level. And I have no reason to believe that's not going to continue on over there in the major leagues, maybe even as soon as next year. Might not be for the Mariners, but nonetheless, I still think that he has a chance to be a big contributor at the major league level, which brings us to our top 5.
We're here.
Number 5 on our list, falling a little bit from where we've had him before, is Harry Ford, catcher for the Seattle Mariners. Joe and I actually both had him ranked at 4, but we did have a consensus that, okay, let's move him down to 5 because we wanted certain other guys in our top 5 here. You can kind of start to piece together what guys we haven't said yet. Interesting to know if you guys figure out who our number 1 is. You probably know. But where we have other guys listed here, Harry Ford, Joe, he's at Double-A now with Arkansas, a guy who is on the concussion IL as we speak right now. Hasn't had the best year at Arkansas. Hasn't been bad necessarily, but he hasn't had the greatest year. Like, there were talks that maybe he could come up in the second half of this year. That's long gone now.
Yeah, no
shot. That's definitely not happening. Could he be here next year sometime? I would say, yeah, that's probably the timeline for him. But Harry Ford's a guy who he has all the time in the world right now, if he wants to progress through the minor leagues because you have Cal Raleigh. Joe, where are you at with Harry Ford? Because we all thought he might get traded.
Did think he might get traded. He also played a game in left field earlier. So, yeah, it's an interesting year for Harry Ford. We had him both ranked 4th. He falls to 5 here because, well, that's just how it works. Is this prospect fatigue? I don't really think so. I just think there are other guys that you're seeing now that the ceiling might not be as high for Harry Ford as we had all maybe hoped, or the other guys are just progressing a little bit better. Harry Ford, it's a guy that, yeah, he's probably your backup catcher next year. And in the second half, maybe, depending on how the rest of his year goes. If he comes back at full strength, comes back to Arkansas, maybe he hits a little bit better. I mean, he's been great defensively, behind the dish. Him moving off of that, it's an interesting situation the Mariners have going forward with how they want to take his direction. But, again, him being 5th, it's no slack on him because the Mariners' top 5 is just, I think, that loaded. Harry Ford, he's a great catching prospect. Could be a corner outfield, could be somewhere around the infield because, like a lot of these guys in the system, the Mariners are great at drafting good athletes. Harry Ford is a fantastic athlete. I have no doubt that he will find some sort of major league success in his career. I hope that they don't trade him. For whatever reason, I feel like he's a guy that could probably stick in this organization long term, especially with like maybe Cal's contract. Whatever. We don't need to get into that. We're talking about prospects here, okay? A guy that moved ahead of him, Colton.
Mm-hmm.
A guy that you had 3rd and I had 5th. I'm shocked that you had this guy ahead of someone else, but Felon and Celestin, shortstop in the Complex League, right?
Yes, he is in the Complex League rookie ball right now. Yes,
you had him 3rd. I had him 5th. My concern was I did not have him say higher. I mean, it's 5th. Like that's you're getting there, man. You're like it's close. The wrist injury. He has been in and out of the lineup, nagging wrist injury going forward. When he is in the lineup, he's mashing, though. And he is showing to be, at least in the Complex League, every level of the comp to Francisco Lindor that was given to him. Like, he is showing out. He's 4th here for us. A guy that's, 3-4 years away?
At least. Yeah, he's only 18. Yeah.
So it's like he's got a lot of time to continue to develop, but he's showing off super raw talent early on. That's that bodes very well for the Mariners' international scouting. And as far as the Mariners' prospect system is concerned, having Felnin at 4, he could be 1 in a lot of different team systems here. Why'd you have him at 3?
I mean, the numbers kind of back it up here. In the complex league, he's hitting 352, 431, 568. With 3 homers, 27 RBI. He struck out 28 times and walked 18 here. Stolen 5 bags as well. Felnin Sellison is another guy who I think is just a freak athlete. He can probably do anything you ask him to do on a baseball field. The wrist injuries are concerning because it's kind of been constant with him. Injuries so far throughout his entire Mariners career have been constant. We didn't see him for a long time because his hamstring?
I think it was hamstring.
His hamstring issues and now wrist issues. So definitely something to monitor there with Felnin Sellison. Again, he's only 18 years old. He has plenty of room to grow into his body. And, I mean, they were, again, the comps to Francisco Lindor are real. I think that the fact that he's a switch hitter is also very fun. One of the few switch hitters I think we have in our top 10.
Ty Pete,
right? Ty Pete and him, yeah. And so I think that right now he's a shortstop for you. He has a really good chance to stick at shortstop, in my opinion. Could move over to like a third base later on in his career. But Felnin Sellison is a guy that, like you said, could be a 1 in a lot of systems. And as some guys graduate in a couple of years, I wouldn't be shocked to see him move up to the Mariners number 1 if he does get healthy and continue to play at this level, Joe. But that brings us to number 3 on our list, Joe. And that is my favorite Mariners prospect in Lazaro Montes. I actually ranked him at 5, and Joe ranked him at 3. I was lower on him than Joe was, simply because he's been having a lot of trouble down there in Everett ever since he got moved up. He has only 1 home run so far in Everett, and for a guy who is very much a power hitter, a guy who is able to drive the ball, only 1 home run so far in Everett does worry me, but he has plenty of time to figure it out. Joe, tell me why you, of all people, had Lazaro ranked higher than I did.
It's hard to deny what he did in Modesto last year and the beginning of this year, in my opinion. Yes, he is struggling in Everett. He's young. He's going to have a lot of time to adjust. I'm not super worried about the Everett struggles right now. If they continue to persist for 3-4 months, then it's like, okay, what's really going on here? But Modesto, both last year and this year, he was absolutely tearing it up. There's a reason why he got moved up to Everett this year. In Modesto this year, he was hitting 309, 411, 527 with a 938 OPS. He was a human highlight reel down there in the California League. It's hard for me not to see what he does on a baseball field and imagine him in a Mariners uniform absolutely terrorizing MLB teams. A guy that, so you're saying Felnin has a lot of time to grow and to develop into his body. Bro's body's there. Laz is there. And he's still young. He has time to continue to develop. Bro's already there with a major league body. It's just about fine-tuning those skills. I'm not super worried about it right now. I get why maybe it does kind of scare you away. I was shocked when you put him at 5 and I put him at 3, though.
I just think Felnin is just a guy that I have, watched. Everything that I've heard about Felnin so far this year is, really raised the bar for him. Or for me, for him. Anyway, Lazaro Montes is hitting 196 down there in Everett. Again, I love the guy. I think he's going to have an incredible future. But the fact that he's struggling down there in Everett right now, obviously, in a perfect world, these guys blow through every level. And they hit 300 with 20 home runs at every single level. Not going to happen for every single guy. Lazaro's a guy who has been in the outfield, hasn't actually looked too bad out there, and his swing and miss hasn't been too bad either. I think when he was down in Modesto, he had 59 strikeouts to 49 walks. Not too bad. Obviously, nobody wants to pitch to him. That brings us to our top 2, Joe. Now, coming in to this year, Cole Young was the Mariners' number 1. And as of right now on MLB Pipeline, he's their number 1. But he's our number 2. Joe, the shortstop down at AA is hitting 252, 348, 385 so far. He has 7 home runs with 40 RBIs. And he's a guy that I think has a really good chance, Joe, to possibly make the Major League roster out of spring training next year. I think that there's a decent chance that if because he's been in Arkansas this entire season, if he pushes the envelope, maybe, possibly even gets called up at some point to AAA at the very end of this season. I don't think it'll happen. He'll probably start next year in AAA. But if somehow, some way he can get there before the end of the season, I think there's a real chance that Cole Young makes a Major League roster next year, even at second base. But where do you think Cole Young is in his development right now?
I think he's about 6 months away. I think he could be a guy that, if you needed a spark plug September call-up, Young could have been that guy. Polanco is definitely playing his way out of needing that. And whether or not the Mariners pick up Polanco's option, I think will be a telltale sign of how they feel about Cole Young going forward. Do I think that they should not take Polanco's option and roll with Young out of spring training? No. Young's got to show that he earns the job, but it's definitely an interesting timeline here with, I agree with you. I think he could win it out of spring training if he shows up, but getting some time in Tacoma might not be bad for him. It looks like Tyler Locklear might need that. I wouldn't be surprised if Cole Young needs it as well. Could be a mid-season call-up next year at the latest, but Cole Young, him at 2, him falling out of the number 1 spot, that's no discredit to him. He is still a very, very, very good prospect. Him, Montes, Celestin should all be top 100 prospects. Harry Ford still will be likely as well. But, Colton, there's a reason why the guy who is number 1 is number 1. He has very quickly shown very high-level hit tools down in Modesto. Keith Law ranked him as the 5th ranked prospect in all of baseball. Super, super high profile there for Colt Emerson. Obviously, first-round pick for the Mariners in 2023. Has had a little bit of injury stuff happen to him down in Modesto, but he has bounced back every single time. Last year in the Complex League, right out of the gate, was hitting .536 with a 1.414 OPS. They said, okay, get that boy to Modesto, help them win the California League Championship, and he did. He has had the full reign of shortstop, basically, down in Modesto this year. He is currently hitting .287, .434 with a .419 slug and an .853 OPS. I do think there's a little bit of hiccups there because of maybe some of the injury problems. Was it a hit by pitch or like a wrist thing?
Bleav so.
That was one of them, and then maybe an oblique earlier than that. I can't remember fully the timeline for his injuries, but Colt Emerson should be the consensus number one prospect. And many, I would say almost everyone's Mariners prospect list here. You had him at 1. I had him at 1. There's no doubt that he is the best prospect just based on like what you see on the diamond. Like he is every bit of a top prospect that you could ask for. Do I think he jumps into like the top 10 for MLB Pipeline? I don't think so. I could see him like around like 15. I think Cole Young's currently like 22. I could see Emerson being like a top 15 though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where he ranks with a lot of guys who were just drafted as well, like Travis Pizzana and whatnot. But overall, Colt Emerson's a guy that, like you just said, should be everybody's number 1 in the Seattle Mariners system. And I think that he probably ends up being a third baseman as he kind of grows more into his body, as he gets a little bit older here. I think the only true shortstop in our top 10, maybe in our top 5, is going to be Feldman. I would assume Cole Young gets moved to second base, whether that be because of his ability to play shortstop, probably not, but just the need at the major league level. Mm-hmm. Colt Emerson's a guy that I could see manning shortstop for the Mariners as early as like maybe even the beginning of 2026.
Yeah.
Like I could definitely see that happen.
Sure.
I can see him skyrocket through the ranks. He's hit everywhere he's gone. I would not be shocked to see him maybe get called up to Everett. Maybe.
I think it's really dependent on how Michael Arroyo and everyone goes. Like, when Fallon gets to Modesto, Emerson will be in Everett.
Right.
Realistically. It's how it works. Like, they kind of just, like, leapfrog each other as they go through the system. Like, when Young got moved up from Everett to Arkansas, everyone's like, okay, like, where's shortstop going to be at for Everett? And I was like, okay, nothing crazy. But as far as, like, Modesto's concerned, like, when Emerson moves up, Fallon will likely get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that'll probably be when Young moves up to AAA and whatnot. So, assuming Michael Arroyo then gets moved up to shortstop, to Arkansas. They're all kind of moving at a similar rate here, which is good in a prospect system. But Colt Emerson, like I said, a guy that we could see at the beginning of 2026. And is he going to be top 10 in all of baseball? Probably not. Like, Keith Law might have been a little high on him there. But overall, I think that he is a guy that is really going to start popping up on prospect lists like that. And it's very hard to be on like a top 10 in all of baseball shortstop list, because that's usually where the best players are. Mm-hmm. You look at guys like Jackson Holliday right now is obviously the number 1 right there. Colt Emerson is probably top 5 of that list specifically.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, if you're the Mariners, you have to be bullish on Emerson. He's probably untouchable for you. There's probably only a few untouchables in your top 5. He is one of them. In my opinion, Lazaro should be one. But nonetheless, I think that we are going to see Colt Emerson really burst onto the scene over the next couple of years. He's a guy who seems like he's a lot of fun. He already had his radio broadcast debut in spring training, which was quite funny.
Just stay healthy, though.
Just stay healthy, for the love of God. That's all I can wish for all these guys on this list. As long as you guys stay healthy, I think we have a good chance of seeing a lot of these guys over the next few years. That's going to do it from us here on episode 110 of the Hit It Here podcast, presented by Bet Online, the Reed Van Scooter episode of the podcast, and go Mariners.